So about 6 months ago, I uploaded my very first VROID tutorial, where I talked about how I created things like hair. It's been a while since then, and the video ended up doing really well, so thank you for that. But eventually I started to notice more and more mistakes in it, which made me question if my video was even helpful in the first place. My explanation was very botched, and there were important tools that I didn't even mention, so I decided to make an updated version for you guys to hopefully somewhat redeem myself. Enough with the lengthy intro, let's just get started. Here we are in the start screen. You can make a new model if you want, but I already had a model that I never finished, so naturally she was the perfect victim for this video. To go to the hair interface, we're going to click this button here. This is going to take you straight to the hair interface. I already did some of the hair, but I'm going to delete it so I can start over from scratch. I'm going to explain all the tools in the hair interface now. Pay attention here if you're a beginner, because knowing what each one does is very important. To your left there are two buttons. These are the hair groups. The first one is called the procedural hair group, which creates the hair automatically, akin to you just doing it yourself. It comes with a bunch of controls which you can manipulate in the window to your right, like hair length, hair position, and the number of hairs in that group. We're not going to be using that today though, so delete it by right-clicking and selecting the delete option. We're going to be using the second button, which is called the freehand group. When you make a hair group, it gives you this little mesh around the head with these green dots all over it. If you click and drag any of these dots, you can change the direction of the mesh, which is going to change the shape of the hair. Next tool I'm going to show you is the mirror tool. It's the small button in the top right of your screen. Clicking it is going to enable symmetry, which is perfect for hairstyles like double buns or twin tails. When I draw in some hairs, you can see that it's going to be replicated on the other side of the head. And this is the tool that we are going to be using for the hairstyle that we're going to make today. Now we can get started on the actual hairstyle. I'm going to use the control points to make the mesh go as close to the head as I can. We're going to make a twin tails hairstyle just like last time, so we need to make some base hair with the center part. Make sure there aren't any weird bumps in the mesh, because these are going to be visible in the hair shape when we draw it in. I'm done changing the mesh, so we can start drawing in the hair now. I'm going to rename my freehand group so I don't get confused later on. To rename my hair group, you click right on the freehand group, which is going to give you a little menu where you can find a renaming option. Now I'll walk you through the control menu on your right. This is where you can find all the options used for controlling hair thickness, width, strand shape, and color. If you select your hair mesh with the select tool, some extra options are going to show up there that you can use on the mesh, like how many control points you want to have. You also have this little curve which you can click and drag. This changes the shape of your hair strands. You also have two sliders called width and thickness. Width, of course, changes width, and thickness changes thickness. These two sliders are the ones you're probably going to be using the most when you're making hair in VROID. I'm going to draw in a couple hairs now. My recording program started lagging a bit here, but try your best to ignore that. The last tool I'm going to be elaborating on for now is called the control points tool. When you select a hair strand, some dots will become visible. Just like the hair mesh, clicking and dragging on any of these dots will change how the hair looks. This tool is your best friend. It will come in handy for retouching messy parts of the hairstyle and will help you put a hair strand in the right place instead of redrawing it over and over. That concludes the little introduction to the hair interface. I'm going to be explaining hair bones and hair textures later down the line, so keep watching if you want to know how that works too. In order to make this hairstyle, we're going to have to fill in the entire head with hair that we can use as a base. Thanks to the symmetry tool, this process will be twice as fast and more neat. Of course, it's not uncommon to make a couple mistakes here and there, so don't be afraid to change things you don't like. It's always better to spend some extra time perfecting something than to rush things and eventually be dissatisfied with what you made. I'm getting started on the part now. I used the base hair texture and the lines on the hair mesh as a guide to make it go straight down. I wanted this hairstyle to have a color split down the center, so I make sure I spend some extra time cleaning up the part to make it as clean as possible. I used the control points a lot here, because when I zoomed in, I noticed a bunch of small little gaps in between the hairs. You can't really see them when you're zoomed out, but I cover them up anyway because it makes my inner perfectionist happy. To finish the base hair, I'll have to fill in the back sides of the hair, which I hate doing. It's super finicky because the hairs tend to clip through the ears a lot, which drives me absolutely crazy. Now that I'm done, I'm going to be selecting all of the hairs at once, and I'm going to use the thickness slider to thin them down a bit so the base hair is a little bit less spiky, which reveals another problem. The hairs clip through the back side of the head, which is a common problem if you're making hairstyles like this. To fix this, I start messing around with the hair mesh. The hair may not be as close to the head anymore, but it's better than your model having a bald spot. Now we can get started on the bangs. To make them, I make a new freehand group and I'm going to add some length to the hair mesh. I draw in 2 long strands of hair. If you want to add these 2 comes down to personal preference, but I like adding them on my models because it helps frame the face. One thing I also like doing is adding some extra smaller strands on the sides that I nicknamed detail hairs. Adding small details like these are a simple yet effective way to boost the quality of your model. I add some more and then I change my hair mesh again. I like adding some extra shape to any loose locks of hair that may be there to make the hair feel a little bit more bouncy instead of having it just go straight down. It just makes it look a little bit more fun in my opinion. I make a new freehand group and I'm going to start to draw in the actual bangs. I decided I wanted to do blunt bangs this time, so I used that little curve I talked about earlier to get the right strand shape. I make sure to use different kinds of width sizes to break up any repetition, which is pretty common when you're making blunt bangs without changing your size every once in a while. You can see I leave some gaps in between the hairs, and that's because I'm going to be switching back to hairs with a sharp point to fill in those so we can get some fun hair textures going. The whole reason why I made the bangs on a separate freehand group is so I can kind of nudge the start of the bangs underneath the base hair so the transition from base hair to bangs is as smooth as possible. If I did that on the same freehand group as the side bangs, this would be a lot harder to cover up. Time for the twin tails. I make another freehand group and do some mesh resizing to get it into a general shape. Just like the side bangs, I'm going to be changing the mesh later anyway to give the twin tails some bounce. I draw in a couple big hair strands, adjust them since they were all over the place, and gradually decrease my size so we can draw in those detail hairs I talked about earlier. Of course those need some retouching as well since it was pretty messy. Then I resize my mesh a little bit to make the shape of the twin tails a little prettier. At this point the hairstyle was pretty much finished, but I decided to add these 2 buns as well because why not? I don't feel like elaborating on how I make them now because I actually want to make a completely separate tutorial for double buns actually, so I don't know, keep an eye out for that. Now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, I'll be showing you how I do my hair textures and hair bones. At first it sounds hard, but it's pretty simple when you get the hang of it. To add hair bones, go to the Bones menu. It will bring up a little menu with some buttons where you can assign your own bone groups, but I'll be clicking the button that says Generate Bone Group, which will do all of that work for me because I'm lazy. As you can see, the hair has different colors now. Those are the different bone groups. However, the base hair and the buns have been assigned to a bone group as well, which means that they can move, which is something we don't want as those are supposed to be solid. So we're going to have to delete them from the bone groups. To find which bone group you don't want, click on the eye symbol in that little menu, which is going to make a bone group invisible. When you found the right one, click right and hit delete. Before you start to panic, no, this won't delete the hair that you've already drawn, just the bone group. The hair is still going to be there when you get back, it's just not able to move anymore, which is exactly what we want. Check it out, moving hair. We're in home stretch. The last thing we gotta do is give the model some hair textures. Next to the Bones menu is the Texture menu. This is where you can make your own hair textures. You can make your own hair textures inside of VROID if you want, but I found that making them externally in an art program has better results overall. If you're not sure how to draw hair textures, you can look up some hair textures from games like I'm Vu on Google Images. They are typically more on the professional side and look great, so they're fantastic for reference. I mentioned I wanted to do 2 hair colors, so I go back to the design menu and I'm going to click this button here, which is going to give me a separate hair color. I'm changing the color to a muddy yellow so I can tell it apart from the white. I'm going to change the color of the hair by selecting a hair and then hitting the dark yellow square to change the hair color. It gets especially satisfying at the part because then you can really see how perfectly straight it is. I made these 2 hair textures myself in KHALI-SEAWEED, which is the art program that I use for my VROID textures and my regular art as well. I'm going to be importing them into VROID by right-clicking Default Image and hitting the Import option. This will give you access to your files. Locate your hair texture in your files and import them into VROID. It should show up right away. I changed the second hair color back to white so the color won't be altered. And that's the final step. We're finally done with our VROID hairstyle. That brings us to the end of the tutorial. Remaking this was a lot of fun, and I hope that you guys have found it helpful as well. Of course, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask them in the comments section. I'd be happy to provide some extra help in case you get stuck. And if you have any ideas for future tutorials, you can leave them in the comments section as well. I'll see you next time. Peace.